Welcome back to Face the Nation. For some expert analysis on the government shutdown, the emerging 2020 presidential race, and so much more, we'd like to welcome our political panel. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Seung Min Kim covers the White House from Capitol Hill for The Washington Post. David Nakamura is a White House reporter for The Washington Post, and Michael Crowley is the White House and national security editor at Politico. Seung Min Kim, let me start with you. Did you hear any signs of progress from what Leader McCarthy talked about today?
There is no signs of progress anywhere that we've seen in the last several days. We don't get a way out of this shutdown, at least legislatively, if three people aren't talking. That's the president, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer. And by all accounts, they are not having any discussions right now after the president reportedly stormed out of that meeting in the Situation Room on Wednesday at the White House. Now, and that's why there seems to be sort of a sense of inevitability, or at least there was until Friday, about the president declaring a national emergency as kind of a way out of the shutdown, although the president seemed to kind of scale that back in his latest comments at the White House on Friday. But there are concerns with that as well. I mean, first of all, it's not a guarantee that the government reopens. Right. Congressman Mark Meadows, who is a Trump ally on Capitol Hill, told us that he's like, I don't really know why people think that just because the president does this, the government will reopen. So that was kind of a sign for us that perhaps this isn't the easiest way out. And also the concern among Republicans about declaring this national emergency. You've gotten some pretty strong pushback from senior Republicans saying this could be an abuse of executive power, something that they talked a lot about under the Obama administration.
Michael, we're hearing, the White House seems to be focusing in on Speaker Pelosi and the opposition in the House. They seem to be seeing an opportunity with some of these new freshman Democrats who've been elected from districts that otherwise have been supportive of Trump. What do you make of this as a strategy? Can you actually pick them off? Do you get anywhere by doing so?
Sure. I mean, I guess it's, I don't know if it's arbitrage or the concept where you can exploit a gap between evidence of the president's past support and then a Democrat maybe, in theory, overperforming in that same place. So those are the natural targets you go for. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that they are strategically hitting those targets so far. And I know that we've reported at Politico that there are White House allies who want to see the president, for instance, go into some of those districts or have White House officials, hold events in these members' districts, really put the pressure on them with local media and try to exploit that tension between a district that was pro-Trump in 16 and maybe went pro-Democrat in 18 and really put them on the spot. But fundamentally, what's so interesting here is the president really just seems to be doubling down on this base strategy, the one that he went for in 2018. And it seems like we're kind of setting the stage for the 2020 presidential campaign. And the president may feel that he just absolutely has to keep that base, but that base is 40-ish%, and it's going to be tough for him to win re-election if he doesn't do something more broadly. So it's going to be interesting to see if he remains dug in on that.
And to that point, we have some CBS News polling that we've done, and it seems that the president's approval rating is low in terms of how he's handling this shutdown, down to about 35%. Of course, for congressional Republicans, it's even lower than that, just 21%. So this isn't necessarily a political win, or could it be?
Well, that's a great point. We have also a new poll out today from the Washington Post, though, that shows something interesting, which is that although a majority of the country does blame the president much more than Democrats for the shutdown, it also said that the support for a border wall has actually spiked among Republicans at large by 16 points over the past year as the president keeps talking about this. And I'm sure the president is seeing that and saying, look, this is broadly popular, not just among the base of the Republican Party, but 87%, according to this poll we have out today, of the Republicans support it. 70% of Republicans strongly support a border wall. So the president's reading that, and he really believes that his strategy is working, despite this idea that he's going to take the blame the longer this goes on.
It's interesting you say that. The CBS News poll, in terms of how you build the wall, shows that about 2/3, 67% of Americans oppose declaring a national emergency to get us there. And it looks like it really breaks down along partisan lines, Jeff.
Right. I mean, a national emergency might actually be the only way out of this impasse because it doesn't seem likely. I was talking this week to one of the new Democrats, going to the opposite of your point, not the most famous new Democrat on the Hill, but one of the new ones. And there's a strong ideological feeling that you can't give in on any compromise, even a compromise that gets them DACA or something else, which is a kind of interesting mirror of what you're seeing in the Republican base, which is wall or nothing at all. So you have everybody dug in, and you have no negotiating going on. I'm always struck in these moments by the fact that the president, who allegedly is one of the world's great negotiators, isn't much of a negotiator at all. So I just don't see this resolving itself anytime soon.
We had a year ago, there was a big debate over immigration. There was the idea you trade a border wall funding for legalization for these dreamers. The president then turned that down by all accounts and asked for more. He said, we want to cut legal immigration, we want to speed up deportations, change laws that Democrats didn't agree with, and many, even moderate Republicans, don't want to change, which is providing some protection legally to immigrant children who are coming across. Since then, he's made it tougher by the policies he's enacted unilaterally. The separations at the border in June of children from their parents, sending troops to the border during the campaign. From the Democrats I talked to, they said this has made us even less, more skeptical of him, that he either take a deal, but also his policies are so inhumane in their mind, we're not going to give him any ground on the wall.
A skepticism that's even more salient is the skepticism of the core of Trump's base, worrying, the Ann Coulter base, let's call it, worrying that he's going to give in. He's extraordinarily sensitive to that. That's why there's really not much hope for a negotiated settlement to this anytime soon, because he's so worried about that core of the core.
Seung Min, when we heard from Senator Graham last week on this show, he was saying one of the things most offensive to him as representative of Republicans was this accusation that somehow in their calls for border security, they're being called racist. I thought it was interesting to hear from Leader McCarthy here that when it comes to those accusations within his party right now around this Iowa Republican, Steve King, that he wants to take a stand on this.
I found it really fascinating as well. I mean, those comments from Leader McCarthy on your show just a few minutes ago was probably among the strongest condemnations that we have heard from senior House Republicans about Congressman King's rhetoric and behavior. And I found it really interesting when he said, quote, actions will be taken against Congressman King, that he's meeting with him tomorrow to discuss this issue.
And it sounds like he may be losing his committee membership. There will be action taken against him.
That was my assumption, because that's usually what a party leader can do. The Congressional Black Caucus has also called for Congressman King to be stripped of his committee assignments. And it's just interesting because Congressman King has been controversial for a very long time. I mean, I'm from Iowa, so I'm familiar with his rhetoric. And he said things about immigration during the immigration debate of a few years ago. But you are seeing this rise in very vocal condemnations of his rhetoric. I mean, it wasn't just Leader McCarthy. Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa called those remarks racist and said they were not representative of the state.
Senator Tim Scott
exactly
had an op-ed on it.
Exactly as well. So the rise in opposition against what the congressman has been saying, frankly, for a long time, has been interesting to watch.
And that's really important because we're at a moment in this country where people worry that certain kinds of rhetoric are being normalized and that the parameters of debate are expanding to areas that would have been intolerable a few years ago. And you think about, for instance, what happened in Charlottesville and the degree that there was some almost tacit approval of that, or even when the president said there were fine people on both sides in Charlottesville. It's nice to see that people are pushing back. They are still, to some degree, enforcing those norms of conversation.
I also want to ask you, Seung Min, to clarify something. Leader McCarthy mentioned, I'm not in Puerto Rico. I'm here in Washington. What was the point he was trying to make there?
Very subtle point.
So there is a contingent of congressional Democrats who are on an event in Puerto Rico right now for a super PAC. The optics aren't great, I will say.
During a shutdown.
During a shutdown. There is obviously, because a lot of the shutdown is a messaging war and optics war. And Leader McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, made a point of saying, look, I am here in D.C. I am ready to work. You pointed out that he's usually in California when you speak to him, and there's some unhappiness among Democratic quarters that trip happened this week.
I'm old enough to remember when people thought that Puerto Rico was a natural Republican stronghold, by the way, but it doesn't seem like the party believes that anymore.
We did, when we looked at the delegation that did go to Puerto Rico, it looks like Speaker Pelosi decided not to go, though she had been originally expected to be there. So it is an optics war, it's a rhetoric war, and unfortunately it doesn't sound like there's much traction to getting anything done. But I want to take a quick break, come back, because there's a lot more we need to sort through here. So we're going to take a short break. Stay with us, more from our panel. And we are back now with our panel. We started off the show with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo talking about his trip through the Middle East. Jeff, can you tell me what the Syria policy is of the Trump administration?
It's the best policy. It's all the best policies. That's the problem in understanding. Probably in doing commentary on our foreign policy is that we have so many foreign policies at once. The Secretary made a valiant effort to suggest that we're not withdrawing from Syria, even though we're actually withdrawing from Syria, and the people who are coming out of Syria, the American troops, even if they're coming out in an orderly fashion, as he said, are there to fight terrorists. And it's very, very hard to make the case that you're doubling down in your fight against terrorism when you're leaving. The core of the problem is that the president he works for is isolationist by disposition, doesn't understand why we're in the Middle East at all. Mike Pompeo comes from another tradition, quite the opposite tradition, believes in a muscular American presence, and we saw his very, very strong speech in Cairo, which is allegedly a repudiation of Obama policy. So
even
it's
down just to the orchestration of it in Cairo.
Right, a little bit in your face. I'm going to Cairo and I'm repudiating what you just said in a really unusual way. And so you have so many different foreign policies inside one administration. It's hard to keep them straight.
Think about this, though. I was thinking about this. You know, the president's other big gambit on foreign policy is this ongoing dialogue of some sort with North Korea. Think of what Kim Jong-un must be seeing here. You have the hawkish Secretary of State and National Security Advisor John Bolton with one view of how to approach Iran and stay in Syria, and the president saying, no, you know, I have my own view. I'm just going to do the opposite. You see now Kim Jong-un continue to send letters to President Trump, very flattering. He wants to deal directly with the president because he sees this sort of a chance, you know, to sort of maybe get some gains. I mean, the idea.
But if he's smart, he might know that those gains are not durable.
They're not durable. But you know, Kim Jong-un's goal was to reduce troop presence, right, in the Korean Peninsula. Look what's going on here in Syria.
Right, and to cut back all the military umbrella that the United States has in the region. On Iran, to add to Jeff's point, you heard the Secretary of State this week say, we are going to try to get every Iranian boot, out of Syria. How do you do that when you don't have a military there?
Can you convince them with strong words? I don't know. You made the excellent point that the threat of military force, obviously, is when you couple that with effective diplomacy, that's one way to do it. No, it doesn't seem. I mean, look, this is why the Israelis and many of the Gulf Arabs were so nervous when Trump announced this impromptu policy shift, radical policy shift, because you leave Syria, that allows Iran to come in fully. Pompeo's speech in Cairo was a very, very anti-Iran speech. Nothing is adding up. This is the problem. I mean, you have to have policies that actually correspond to the reality on the ground. And so I think it's very, very hard to understand how this works.
Pompeo did say something today that I've heard him say before that I think could be worth focusing on. He keeps referring to the withdrawal of uniformed American troops from Syria. Now, I don't know exactly what he means, but I'm wondering to what degree the administration at least may be telling himself, officials like Pompeo, in defending Trump's policy, we're going to have the CIA in there. We might even have contractors. We know there's been a lot of debate around this administration with the possibility of using contractors. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. I think it's noteworthy that he keeps stressing that word.
It's a good point to parse the language on that, because clearly having an intelligence presence is incredibly important in a place that is home to so many terror groups at this point. That's one of the things that Israelis were concerned about.
Right, of course.
Losing.
I mean, the other quick point to make on this is that Pompeo's speech was very, very hard on Iran, but one of the reasons it's not flying in the Middle East is that, recognizing that all diplomacy is hypocrisy to some degree, there was not a harsh word to be said about Saudi Arabia. And one does not have to think that Iran is anything other than the leading state sponsor of terror. You can still think that, but also think that our putative allies are also human rights violators and authoritarian despotic regimes. It's fascinating to watch this week.
Michael, I want to ask you, we did ask both the Secretary and Leader McCarthy about these reports in the past few days about the president's relationship with Russia, or at least his decision to not make public the notes that he has had from interpreters from private meetings with Vladimir Putin. Why is it important that the rest of the national security establishment be part of this? As Leader McCarthy said, this is just about a personal relationship.
Sure. Well, there's the sort of traditional reason, which is that the foreign policy machine works better if all the smart people who are looking at it from different angles, people who have regional focuses, who have expertise in Putin's psychology, who are arms control experts, can see the conversation and weigh in and referring back to parsing language, hey, it was really important and significant that Putin used this word. He hasn't used this word in 6 years, and it means that they're interested in this again. Or somebody can point out, I can see that he's putting pressure on this issue, trying to move us. The president, who is totally new to diplomacy as of 2 years ago, wouldn't be picking up on those things. That's just how it traditionally works. And it's almost like crowdsourcing, right? Get all the best minds looking at this, and then you get together and talk about it. Okay, so now the Trump-specific problem is that we know senior officials in our own Justice Department at one point a couple of years ago, according to the great reporting by the New York Times yesterday, believed it was at least worth investigating whether the president, I can't believe I'm saying these words on television, it's like, am I living in a dream, may have been acting as an agent for the Russian government.
It's
and
not a
Vladimir
dream,
Putin.
it's a bad movie.
I mean, a bad movie, the greatest movie ever made, who knows?
It's an extraordinary report.
It's stunning. And I want to say, to go back, and then the Washington Post, by the way, followed up with a great report that after a meeting he had with Vladimir Putin and only a translator in the room asked the translator for those notes and took them away, and they were not circulated through the government. Just very quickly, last point, David, to your earlier point about leaders seeing the officials around Trump and going around them and going straight to Trump. A lot of reason to think that Vladimir Putin is doing that. Whether or not it's some kind of a spy movie running an agent thing or just pure psychology, that's the game he's playing.
It's also extraordinary to have America's top diplomat, the Secretary of State, twice clarify that the president is not a national security threat and say that's laughable.
It's worth dilating on this for one moment, that we're in a situation where we're discussing in serious terms whether or not the President of the United States is a Russian intelligence asset. And that's what's happening in Washington today. And that is truly remarkable thing that we're experiencing right now.
And the president's response on this about keeping this meeting quiet and keeping people out of it is not just to have a better relationship with a leader like Vladimir Putin, but also that there's been leaks of his other, especially early in his presidency, there's some really embarrassing leaks about what he said to other world leaders. It made him look foolish, made him look reckless. But now he's sort of created this extra problem that because he's not staying on some sort of script or going with talking points that are developed by a national security agency or staff, be prepared for these meetings, sort of ad-libbing and having these sort of embarrassing leaks come out. Now he's left with this situation where it looks certainly bad if he's taking notes from his translator.
And the story's not going away. We'll continue it, but we have to leave the panel here, and we'll be back in a moment.